The subway platform buzzed with its usual chaos, doors hissing, hurried footsteps echoing, and a hum of conversations blending into the background. Marcus, a young black man with a quiet demeanor, adjusted the strap of his worn backpack as he stepped into the car. Exhaustion clung to him after a grueling shift at the mechanic's shop, but the thought of getting home for his niece's birthday dinner gave him energy. He managed to find a spot by the door, one hand gripping the overhead bar for balance. Across from him stood a woman, visibly pregnant, holding onto a pole for support. Her face shone with perspiration, and her legs trembled as the train lurched forward. Marcus noticed her struggle and acted without hesitation. "Here, ma'am, take my seat," he said, his voice calm but firm. The woman hesitated, her cheeks tinged with embarrassment, but she finally accepted with a grateful smile. "Thank you so much," she murmured. Marcus nodded and shifted closer to the door. His gaze flicked to his watch. He was still on track to make it to dinner. For a brief moment, he felt a quiet pride in his small gesture. But the moment was fleeting. As the train pulled into the next station, the woman's body slumped forward. Her bag slipped from her grip, and she collapsed onto her knees, gasping for air. The car froze. A man shouted, "Help her!" Panic rippled through the crowd as Marcus instinctively moved toward her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, crouching beside her. Passengers scrambled, some to pull the emergency brake, others to dial 911. Amidst the chaos, the woman lifted her head, her voice weak yet cutting through the confusion. "It was him," she gasped, pointing at Marcus. "He did something to me." Marcus blinked in disbelief. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with shock. The murmurs began, suspicion swirling around him like a storm. His act of kindness had been twisted into something sinister, and so the nightmare began. The train screeched to a halt at the next station, the doors sliding open to a cacophony of noise and confusion. Passengers spilled onto the platform, their faces etched with worry, suspicion, and something darker, fear. Marcus remained frozen, his back pressed against the cold steel of the train wall. Around him, a storm of accusations brewed. He was standing too close to her, a man in a gray suit muttered, his brow furrowed. Another woman, clutching the handle of a stroller, whispered, "I don't know. Something about him feels off." Marcus raised his hands, his voice steady despite the fire raging in his chest. "I didn't do anything. I gave her my seat. That's it. Ask anyone." The woman, still seated on the floor and clutching her stomach, pointed at him again. "It was him," she cried, her voice trembling with pain. "I felt dizzy the moment he stood near me." The crowd shifted, their collective unease turning into pointed suspicion. Marcus felt the weight of every gaze, every whisper, pressing down on him. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words caught in his throat as two transit officers entered the train car. Their presence was palpable, their uniforms a stark reminder of how quickly things could spiral out of control. "What's going on here?" one of them asked, his eyes scanning the scene. Passengers immediately began talking over one another, their fragmented accounts painting a picture Marcus didn't recognize. "She collapsed, and he was right there," a woman shouted, pointing a shaky finger at him. Marcus shook his head. "I gave her my seat. That's all. I was standing by the door the whole time." The taller officer held up a hand to silence the crowd. "You," he said, gesturing to Marcus. "Step off the train so we can sort this out." Marcus hesitated. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "Stay calm. Don't give them a reason to see you as a threat." Swallowing his frustration, he nodded and stepped onto the platform, his heart pounding. The crowd spilled out after him, their whispers growing louder, more cutting. "I bet he slipped something into her bag," one man muttered. "Maybe he drugged her," another added. Marcus clenched his fists, the injustice of it all tightening his chest. He wanted to scream, to demand they see the truth. But he knew that wouldn't help. He had to stay calm, no matter how much it hurt. As the officers questioned him, a teenage girl with braids stepped forward. Her voice, though young, carried a confidence that silenced the crowd. "Wait, I saw everything," she said, holding up her phone. "He didn't touch her or her bag. He just gave her his seat. That's it." Her words hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope in the sea of doubt. Marcus turned to her, gratitude in his eyes. But the tide of suspicion was not so easily turned, and the fight for the truth was far from over. The air on the platform felt thicker, heavier, as if the weight of judgment pressed down on Marcus from every angle. He stood stiffly, his hands at his sides, his eyes flicking between the transit officers and the murmuring crowd. The teenage girl with the phone held her ground, defiant amidst the sea of suspicion. "I've got it all on video," she said firmly, stepping closer to the officers. "You can see everything." One officer extended a hand, taking her phone. His partner leaned in to watch the screen. As the video played, the chatter around them began to hush. The footage was clear. Marcus standing near the door, his hands gripping the rail, his posture casual and unthreatening. The moment he offered his seat was caught in vivid detail, as was his distance from the woman afterward. "This doesn't show anything suspicious," the shorter officer muttered, glancing at his taller colleague. The taller officer frowned, his gaze shifting to the pregnant woman sitting nearby, her face pale and tear-streaked as paramedics checked her vitals. "Ma'am," he said gently, crouching next to her, "are you sure it was him? Did he do anything to you?" Her lips quivered and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "I felt dizzy, and he was so close. I just assumed." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His chest tightened, frustration boiling beneath his calm exterior. "You assumed." The phrase echoed in his mind, louder and louder. How quickly kindness had been twisted into suspicion. The teenage girl's voice cut through his thoughts. "You see? He didn't do anything wrong," she said, her tone sharp and insistent. "This isn't fair." But fairness was a fragile thing in moments like these. The crowd's whispers didn't stop. Some people looked away, embarrassed by their earlier accusations, while others clung to their assumptions, unwilling to let them go. One woman muttered, "Even if the video shows nothing, he still feels off." Another man chimed in, "Exactly. You can't be too careful these days." The officers exchanged glances, their hesitation palpable. The taller one finally turned back to Marcus. "We've reviewed the video, but we still need to file a report. Stay nearby while we sort this out." Marcus's fists tightened at his sides. "File a report for what? I didn't do anything." "We're just following protocol," the officer replied curtly. "It's not an accusation yet." As the paramedics wheeled the pregnant woman toward the ambulance, one turned to the officers. "Her blood pressure's dangerously low. That could explain the dizziness and confusion, but we'll need to run more tests." The taller officer nodded but didn't meet Marcus's eyes. "Looks like this might have been a misunderstanding." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "A misunderstanding? Do you have any idea what you've put me through? What they've put me through?" He gestured to the crowd, his voice rising. "All because I gave up my seat?" The officer didn't respond, his gaze shifting awkwardly. The teenage girl stepped closer to Marcus, her expression a mixture of sympathy and determination. "I'm sorry this happened to you," she said softly. "I posted the video online. People need to see the truth." Marcus blinked, surprised by her courage. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady but strained. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," she replied, "because this isn't right." The officers finally stepped back, signaling that Marcus was free to go. But as he walked away, the weight of what had just happened stayed with him. His kindness had been weaponized against him, and though he was cleared, the scars of suspicion lingered. The streets outside the station felt suffocating, despite the cold night air. Marcus leaned against a lamppost, his body tense and his mind racing. The weight of the encounter clung to him like a shadow. The world had moved on. The platform cleared, the train departed, but Marcus's reality had been irreversibly altered. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his sister. "Are you on your way?" "Dinner's starting soon." He stared at the message, his fingers hovering over the screen. How could he explain what had just happened without tarnishing the evening she'd been so excited about? Before he could respond, the teenage girl who had defended him stepped out of the station. She spotted him and hesitated, then approached cautiously. "Hey," she said, her voice soft. "Are you okay?" Marcus nodded, though the truth was far from that. "I'll be fine," he said, his tone clipped. He didn't mean to be dismissive, but his emotions were too raw to untangle. The girl didn't leave. "I just wanted you to know, I've already gotten comments on the video. People are supporting you, saying how wrong this was." Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. Comments on a video won't change what just happened, won't stop it from happening again. Her shoulders sagged, but she didn't argue. "You're right, but maybe it'll make someone think twice next time." He glanced at her, her youthful face full of determination. "What's your name?" he asked. "Zara," she replied. "Well, Zara," Marcus said, "you stood up when no one else did. That means something." She nodded, but the moment hung heavy between them. Marcus pushed himself off the lamppost, his phone still in hand. "Thanks again," he said, his voice softening. "You did more than most would." Zara gave him a faint smile before turning to leave. Marcus watched her disappear into the night, the flicker of her bravery leaving a small dent in the armor of his frustration. Finally, he tapped out a reply to his sister. "On my way." The warm light of his sister's apartment was a stark contrast to the icy tension of the subway. Laughter and the smell of home-cooked food greeted him as he stepped inside. His niece ran to hug him, her small arms wrapping tightly around his legs. "You're late," she said, pouting. Marcus forced a smile. "I'm here now, aren't I?" The evening unfolded as expected. Candles on the cake, songs sung off-key, the usual banter of family. But the warmth felt distant, a soft melody drowned out by the echoes of earlier accusations. After the candles were blown out and the dishes cleared, Marcus found himself on the balcony staring at the city lights. His sister joined him, a mug of coffee in her hands. "You've been quiet," she said gently. He hesitated, then sighed. "Something happened on the way here." She listened intently as he recounted the ordeal, her expression shifting from disbelief to anger. When he finished, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's not fair, Marcus. You did the right thing, and they turned it into something ugly." Marcus shrugged. "Fairness doesn't change the way people see me, doesn't stop them from assuming." His sister tightened her grip on his shoulder. "You can't let it change you. You stayed calm. You kept your head. That says everything about who you are, not who they think you are." He nodded slowly, her words seeping in. As he stared out at the glowing skyline, one thought solidified in his mind. Kindness wasn't a weakness. It wasn't always rewarded, but it was necessary in a world too quick to judge. "I'd do it again," he said quietly. His sister smiled. "That's why I'm proud of you." The next morning, Marcus sat on his small kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. The events of the previous evening weighed heavily on him. Despite the laughter and warmth of his niece's birthday party, the whispers, the stares, and the accusations had followed him into his dreams, replaying in an endless loop. He opened his phone, almost reluctantly, and saw several notifications. Zara's video had gone viral. The comments poured in by the hundreds, each one a testament to how quickly the world could form an opinion. Some were supportive. "This is what's wrong with society. People jumping to conclusions. Props to the guy for staying calm. We need more people like Marcus and Zara who stand up for the truth." But others stung. Why would she accuse him if nothing happened? There's got to be more to the story. He looks guilty. His body language says it all. Marcus's jaw tightened. Even with evidence clearing his name, the whispers of doubt persisted. He set the phone down, staring at the chipped edge of the table. Why is it always so hard to just be seen as a person first? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, Zara stood there holding a newspaper. Her face lit up with a sheepish grin. "Hey," she said, "I found out where you live. Hope that's not creepy." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A little, yeah?" Zara laughed nervously, holding up the paper. "I wanted you to see this." He took it and scanned the front page. A headline jumped out at him. "Viral video sparks debate on bias and assumptions." Below it was a screenshot of Zara's TikTok video, with Marcus offering his seat to the pregnant woman. The article recounted the incident in detail, including how the video had sparked a conversation about implicit bias and the rush to judgment. Marcus frowned, unsure how to feel. "Why'd you bring this to me?" Zara hesitated. "Because it's not just about you anymore. People are talking. Some are angry, some are reflective, but they're talking. Maybe this will make a difference." He looked at her, skeptical but appreciative of her optimism. "You really think a headline changes anything?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But it's a start, and you deserve to be seen for what you really are, not what people assumed." Her words hit deeper than Marcus expected. He nodded slowly. "Thanks, Zara, for everything." She smiled, then turned to leave. Before she could go, Marcus called after her. "Hey, you were brave to speak up. I hope you don't lose that." She grinned. "You either." As Zara left, Marcus sat back down, the newspaper still in his hands. The headline wasn't just about him, it was about a much larger truth. Assumptions had the power to destroy, but stories like this could shine a light on that darkness. Marcus wasn't naive enough to think everything would change overnight. He knew the next time he stepped on a train, there might still be wary glances or whispered doubts. But for now, he felt a flicker of hope, a reminder that kindness, though fragile, could ripple outward in unexpected ways. The following week, Marcus walked into his shop for another shift. The familiar scent of grease and oil greeted him, along with the clanging of tools and the low murmur of his coworkers' chatter. Yet, something was different. Heads turned as he entered, and his coworkers exchanged glances, some curious, others awkward. "Yo, Marcus," one of them called, his tone tentative. It was Darnell, the oldest mechanic in the shop and someone Marcus had always looked up to. "Saw you in the paper. That was some crazy mess." Marcus set his bag down and looked at Darnell, then at the others. "Yeah, it was," he said evenly, not wanting to delve too deep into the subject. Darnell wiped his hands on a rag and stepped closer. "They did you dirty, man, but I gotta say, you handled it like a pro. Don't know if I'd have kept my cool like that." A few others nodded in agreement. Marcus felt a small wave of relief, realizing they weren't looking at him with judgment, but respect. "Thanks," he said quietly. "It wasn't easy." Darnell chuckled, his voice softening. "Ain't nothing easy about standing in the middle of a storm, but you stood tall. That counts for something." The day passed in a blur of repairs and diagnostics, but the words lingered. For the first time since the incident, Marcus felt a glimmer of validation from those around him. Later that evening, Marcus decided to check the comments on Zara's video again. This time, the tone had shifted. Many of the new comments shared personal stories of similar experiences with bias and rushed judgment. Some thanked Marcus and Zara for shedding light on an issue that often went unspoken. One comment stood out. "Marcus, your story made me rethink how I see people. Thank you for showing grace under pressure. We need more of that in this world." It wasn't the kind of validation Marcus had sought, but it mattered. Slowly, he began to feel like his experience wasn't just an isolated event, but part of a larger conversation. 2 days later, a surprising email arrived. It was from a local community organization that focused on racial equity and social justice. They had seen the video and the subsequent coverage, and they wanted Marcus to speak at one of their events. Marcus stared at the screen, his initial instinct to decline. He wasn't a public speaker, and the thought of reliving the ordeal in front of an audience made his stomach twist. But Zara's words echoed in his mind. Maybe this will make a difference. He typed a short reply. I'll do it. The event was held in a modest community center, the room filled with folding chairs and a small stage. Marcus stood backstage, his heart pounding. Zara had come to support him, sitting near the front with her phone ready to record. When his name was called, Marcus stepped forward, gripping the microphone with steady hands. He took a deep breath, scanning the audience, and began. My name is Marcus, and a week ago I was accused of something I didn't do. What started as a simple act of kindness turned into a storm of suspicion and judgment. It was one of the hardest moments of my life, but it taught me something important. He paused, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of his experience. We live in a world that moves too fast. We make assumptions, jump to conclusions, and forget that behind every face is a story. That day on the train, I was just a guy trying to do the right thing. But it could have ended differently, and for many people it does. The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Marcus continued, his confidence growing. Kindness is fragile, but it's also powerful. It can break cycles of judgment, challenge assumptions, and remind us of our shared humanity. That's why I'm here, to remind all of us, myself included, that we can do better. We have to do better. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Zara grinned at him from the front row, her face full of pride. Marcus stepped off the stage, his heart lighter than it had been in days. For the first time since the incident, he felt a sense of control, as if he had reclaimed his narrative. His story wasn't just about what had happened to him, it was about what he could inspire in others. In the weeks following the event, Marcus noticed subtle but meaningful changes in his life. The viral video, the article, and his speech had rippled farther than he could have imagined. Though not everyone in his daily life brought it up, there was a quiet acknowledgement in the way some people treated him, with more patience, more respect. At the mechanic shop, his coworkers seemed to listen more intently when he spoke. A customer, an older man with a warm smile, even mentioned seeing him on the news. You handled that situation better than most, he said while paying his bill. Gives me hope for the younger generation. These moments gave Marcus a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just repairing cars. He was showing through his actions what resilience and integrity looked like. One evening, he received a message from Zara. Guess what? A teacher at my school showed your video in class today. We had a whole discussion about bias and assumptions. People actually got it, thought you should know. Marcus smiled, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. He finally replied, Thanks, Zara. You're braver than you know. Their connection, born from the chaos of that subway ride, felt like one of the few good things to come from it. Zara's determination to speak up reminded him of the importance of allies, especially in moments when the world seemed against you. At home, his sister continued to check in on him, often under the guise of casual conversation. But one night, after a quiet dinner, she leaned across the table and asked, Do you think it was worth it? Giving up your seat, I mean. Marcus stared at her, surprised by the question. He set down his fork and thought for a moment before answering. I do, he said firmly. Even knowing how it turned out, I'd do it again. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and sadness. I just hate that doing the right thing cost you so much. Marcus smiled faintly. It didn't cost me everything. If anything, it reminded me what's worth fighting for. Months later, Marcus was back on the subway, heading home after another long day. The car was just as crowded as before, filled with the usual mix of tired commuters and distracted passengers. He stood by the door, leaning against the pole, when he noticed an elderly man struggling to stay upright as the train jolted forward. Without hesitation, Marcus offered his seat. The man smiled gratefully and sank into it with a nod. "Thank you, young man." Marcus stood by the door again, his stance calm and resolute. He noticed a few people glance his way, perhaps recognizing him from the video that had spread so far. But this time, the stares didn't bother him. As the train moved on, he realized something important. The world might not change overnight, but each act of kindness, no matter how small, was a step toward breaking the cycle of judgment and fear. He had faced suspicion, endured whispers, and fought to reclaim his dignity, but he had come out stronger. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Marcus knew one thing for sure. He would keep giving up his seat, keep standing up for what was right, and keep moving forward. Because sometimes, the simple choice to care was the most radical act of all. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest videos. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thank you all for taking the time to watch, and see you in the next video.